Good morning, kings, queens, and internet fiends. Let's get started. My name's Sam. Today we're going to talk about stop outsourcing your opinions. It's not for y'all, but this is for just the room in general. I hate most of these people. Most of you guys know somebody like this. But outsourcing your opinion is basically letting somebody else think for you. It's really easy to do that nowadays because everybody's voicing their opinions all the time, 24/7. In a comment section, in your real life, as a coach, as a teammate, as a friend, as a player. Sometimes it's a bot. Some people aren't even online. Like, some people aren't real in real life. But it's really easy to fall into this trap. And I mean that sincerely. It's not something to where I am better than anybody, you are better than anybody. That's not true. That's not true. You probably outsourced your opinion in the last 24 hours. But what does that actually look like, right? It means going to your phone. Let's say you're scrolling on YouTube Shorts for a little bit, you're checking something out, something's funny, you go to the comments, you laugh a little bit harder. There's no harm, no foul. It's just a fun little joke, and somebody said something to add on to it. Man, now I'm crying laughing. This is awesome. I sent it to one of my friends, right? We've all had that original experience before. But what happens when you start to build that as a habit? Every time that you go to a new video or a new post, you are checking the comments to see what the most liked comment is, or the most invasive idea for the media might be. That's normal. That's considered normal. But what that does over time is that you stop having an inner dialogue for what it is you're thinking about the thing that you're looking at. You're simply reacting to other people's reactions as a source of entertainment. And what that does over time, it weakens and dilutes how it is you think for yourself, how it is you feel about yourself, and how it is you do things with the information that you get, right? So we have to stop outsourcing our opinions. And in a world where opinions matter to get attention, to garner vision, to garner support, how do you play that game? How do you do both simultaneously at the same time? And the answer is always create. That's number one. It's like being a sports analyst, right? There are some people who get paid millions of dollars to talk about other athletes and what they're going to do in the following season. They hop online, they hop on their podcast, they hop on a mic, and they start telling you exactly what somebody else is going to do, regardless of what that person's personal control over that situation might be. It might be a football player who's supposed to be a quarterback and he's coming back from an injury. A sports analyst is going to say, oh, this guy's not going to be good enough, he's not going to be ready, he's going to go to a bad team, he's going to throw this many amount of interceptions, X amount of touchdowns, it's going to be crazy, I can't wait, blah, 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 blah. And you sit there and you watch it and you're like, wow, this guy makes a lot of good points. But at the same time, that stimulates the inner dialogue, but it still has to stay there, it still has to be there. Not necessarily just reacting to the point where you're not thinking anything, you're solely attaching yourself to somebody else's thought. And the reason that this is important sorry about that. The reason that this is important is because as a personal brand, you have to be consistent. You have to be somebody who is clear on who they are. Because if you're wishy-washy and you're not necessarily intentional about how it is that you deliver ideas or deliver what it is you're giving to other people, that doesn't build trust on what you're doing. And if there's no trust, there's no vision. And if there's no vision, there's no community, right? This is important when you're trying to get things like brand deals. This is important when you're trying to get recruited. This is important when you're trying to make a relationship with your high school coach, right? These things are kind of the new stepping stones for how it is that you integrate yourself into somebody's life without necessarily having to shuck, jive, nickel and dance just for them to give you a little bit of attention. It's moving closer towards that, but you're still in the space to where you can take enough time in integrating your own ideas inside of basically a petri dish of presentation, to the point where people can acknowledge what you're doing, they can acknowledge what you're saying, and they can have some type of level of trust to then give you the time of day about your opinions, thoughts, feelings, whatever the case might be, right? Number 3, stop looking. Now, are you gonna do this? No. But would it work? Yes. The problem with how it is that we're starting to outsource the visions that we have is the same way that you would look at building a car, right? It's one thing if you are taking notes from an older mechanic who's like, yeah, buddy, I've seen this car before. I know what model this is. And you slowly he takes you under his wing, and now you're learning how to fix a 1984 Silverado, or whatever the case might be. It's another thing if you're trying to build this car, right? And you're listening to 15 mechanics every stage of the way, and all of them make you feel different ways about the progress that you're making on this vehicle. One might tell you, oh yeah, this is the best car I've ever seen since sliced bread. One might be like, oh yeah, this is terrible, and you're agreeing with it. One might be like, oh yeah, this is funny, for whatever the case might be, right? Those different ideas and different visions, over time, it causes what we like to envision as internal chaos. For a long period of time, the focus was on someone's mental health, right? From the programming from people around them, and how that would, lead to things like anxiety and depression and, confusion. But over time, what we've started to realize and learn about people is that most people aren't supposed to be able to sustain this many ideas from this many people towards the thing that they're trying to do. So if this guy's trying to build a car, in this example, you can only rely. Sorry, it's a text I got. If this guy's trying to build a car, you can only rely on your internal vision and the guidance from your internal vision. It's better to not like something and be able to form your own thoughts on why you don't like it than to say you don't like something and struggle to put an articulate vision, to have an antithesis of why I don't like this thing. What that's showing you is now you're able to be programmed and moved with emotion rather than practicality or your own personal intuition or your own personal discretion, right? And that's normal. This is normal. This is not a fantasy land. You have brain rot Reggies everywhere thinking about how they can get as much engagement from people across the internet, as much, chaos that they can across, all platforms, so that they can simply, funnel you into a rabbit hole that's going to keep you online watching ads or doing whatever the thing that is most engaging that doesn't serve you personally, right? And that sucks, but it's true. But where does this come from? Why do we outsource our own opinions? And the answer is a lack of confidence. A lack of confidence and a means to agree. For example, we all know the sun is going to rise tomorrow, right? We assume, we live under that assumption. So we could never argue about whether that would happen or not. If you saw something online that said, hey, the sun's not gonna rise tomorrow, you would react in one of two ways, which is, this guy's an idiot, I'm gonna leave that alone. Or, no, you idiot, the sun is gonna rise tomorrow. Let me tell you why. Also, look at this screenshot. Right? One of those is staying in your purpose, and another one is being dragged down through somebody's negativity, which doesn't seem like a big step. But in the same way you would mess with poison ivy and then get yourself itchy. If you play with negativity for too long, you'll spiral into this thing that you don't respect or even acknowledge as something that would be bothersome, right? And that's a scary thing to do, and it's one of those things that you don't feel like it's a big step until it's too late, right? And when you're somebody who wants to be agreeable, because being agreeable is safe, what happens is a lot of times you don't stand 10 toes on what it is that you believe or even say. They call it, there's this terminology in the business world where you can roll, it's basically you can be submissive to conflict because it's the safest, most effective way to deal with somebody who doesn't necessarily get along with the idea that you have. If you're introducing, let's say, all right, I want you to, for example, let's say your teacher wanted you to all use pens for the next week, but you liked pencils. You have two options. You can either argue and stand 10 on being like, hey, I don't want to use pens because I prefer pencils. Or you can be like, this sucks, but I don't want to shake too many feathers, so I'm gonna just go ahead and use the pens. And that's a slippery slope into kind of getting further and further away from your purpose. And when you're doing something like being a breakthrough athlete, when you're doing something like being a breakthrough person with whatever it is that you're building over time, you can't be too agreeable for too long, because if it was agreeable, it would already have been done. And so when those two things kind of seep in, because apps are designed to strip you of your confidence, apps are designed to be relatable and agreeable. When those two things strip you of your own opinion, then what happens is that now you outsource your opinion to other people. Now you don't like something simply because somebody else you don't know, who you've never met, doesn't like something. You don't want to be out of the know. You don't want to be away from the flock. And that can be very, very degrading over time, because that doesn't equate to what is necessary to get recruited, to get scouted, to get acknowledged, and to, if you want to build your own business or be your own person. Those are kind of the things that you have to be able to be mindful about over time. It happens more in comment sections than anywhere else, but it can also happen in your real life. It can happen with your coaches. It can happen with your family. It can happen with your friends. In the same way you can say you like a show because everybody else says they like a show. That's stupid, but it's also what makes you feel surrounded by more friends. And so the question you really have to begin to ask yourself is, what do I want my friends to look like? Because if you're spending all your time laughing at people who you would never be friends with, over time, all you're doing is falling down the rabbit hole of associating yourself with people that you don't respect, as opposed to spending time with the people that are similar to you, finding your flock and your geese. Now you can be more mindful about what it is that you're spending time on, attention to, and comments that you're looking into. Right? You would never pay too long. You would never listen to the guy who's never left his mom's house to teach you how to get to Bora Bora. You'd never trust the guy who's never played a sport past middle school to show you how to make it to the league. there is a power in trusting someone else's experience, but there's also a negativity in outsourcing your own intuition to somebody else's life. Right? Moving forward, and the practice for today is next time you check your phone, form your opinion before you open the comments. That's gonna be a lesson for today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
I call her karma. She eat your heart out like Jeffrey Dahmer. Oh my gosh. Alright, I gotta see if I can export.